My name is Bruno Bianchi Sarcone. I run Spainguru.es, and this is the free Spanish non-lucrative visa webinar for Spainguru. We're going to be recording this, and I'm going to be sending you a recording link when we finish. And you can ask your questions anytime. Make sure to ask your questions adding a question mark in the bottom right corner of your screen, the chat box. Now, how did I structure this webinar? It's a timeline: before the application, during the application, and after the approval. We're going to have a look to definition, how the consulates and BLS offices work, tourist and residency, immigration status, some tax considerations, and we're going to go through the eligibility of the non-lucrative visa documentation requirements. Then we're going to talk about the process, the timing, and the timeline. Yes, what comes first and what comes after. And then after the approval, how you arrive to Spain, renewal process, long-term residence potentially if you want to pursue the Spanish citizenship, and transition to a work permit. We're going to talk about all that. Remember that the content of this webinar is for information purposes only, and it's not legal advice. The requirements listed here are not official. Please check your specific consulate's requirements. A little bit about Spainguru before everything. Our objective is facilitating the relocation process for English-speaking foreigners to Spain since 2014, and you can read some pretty amazing reviews out there. You can use Spainguru for absolutely free. Spainguru.es. You can find free resources like the weekly newsletter that I send every Monday, where I feature the top discussions on social media groups and most watched video of the week, etc., etc. You can watch the YouTube channel. I think it's nearly 1,000 videos right now, blog posts with more than 1,700 articles. And as I said, the Spainguru community is a huge community with an aggregated total of more than 150,000 members. The Spanish non-lucrative visa group has more than 21,000 members, so the largest group out there that if you haven't done so, please join today. There you have the link, facebook.com/groups/SpanishNLV. But I also personally vet professionals of the immigration, tax, and many other sectors. If you need help with your visa processing and any other immigration procedure, you can find vetted immigration experts on Spainguru.es that I have been recommending for several years. The same with tax advisors who are expert in Spanish tax filings, US filings, and financial planners. And if you plan to do it yourself, if you plan to apply for Spanish non-lucrative visa or any other residency by yourself, you will still probably need a Spanish visa compliant health insurance, medical certificates, foreign translations, apostille services. Those are private apostille services, and other, let's say, auxiliary services like bank accounts, money transfer services, property rentals, even mortgages, and so much more. More than 100 services out there. So it's absolutely free for you to go to Spainguru.es and check around, because you can find also discounts, referral codes, and so many other things. Now let's go with the presentation. And we start with before the application. First of all, what is the Spanish non-lucrative visa? It's a Spanish visa for non-EU citizens who can financially support themselves and who don't need to work in Spain. It is basically defined by a law, which is a ley orgánica. This is the highest hierarchy law. And then you have a regulation of the law, which has recently changed. The new regulation took effect last May 20th, 2025. So many changes that we're going to go through. You cannot apply for the Spanish non-lucrative visa from Spain. This is something important. The digital nomad visa, you can do it, and it's actually recommended to do it from Spain. But the NLV, you can only do it from the consulate that serves the area where you are a legal resident. And on Spainguru.es, you can find a dedicated page for each of the consulates of the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. You can find it on Spainguru.es/Spain non-lucrative visa. And why is it interesting? First of all, you can access all the official links for the requirements of the non-lucrative visa. But not only that, and if you go, I'm going to show you here, with the screen sharing. Yes, it's Spainguru. If I search Spanish visas, Spanish non-lucrative visa, find your consulate. Yes, for example, you have United States here, and you say, for example, Miami. Yes, you push Miami here. And what is interesting? Why is it interesting to know that there are dedicated pages here? You have all the official links, okay? And here you have all the first-hand experiences from Spainguru community members, all right? So it is very, very important that you guys read about others' experiences, because every consulate is extremely different one from another. So it's important that you stay on top of all the news, all the things, and all the small details. As you probably heard, the devil is in the details, and I'm trying to condense all the information for each of the consulates on Spainguru.es. Now, many of the consulates, all the consulates in the UK, for example, work with a third party to process the non-lucrative visas. For example, but in the US, not all the consulates work with a third party. This third party is an Indian company called BLS International that has operations in more than 66 countries. They don't only do the processing of visas for Spain, but also for many other countries. As I said, all the consulates in the UK work with BLS. But in the US, not all the consulates use BLS for the processing of the non-lucrative visa. For example, New York City doesn't use it, and you will be dealing directly with the New York City consulate. So this is something that you need to understand, because in case your consulate works with this outsourced company, you will be dealing with this company instead and not with the consulate directly. Now, let's talk about visa requirements for Spain. In general, British, US, Canadian, Australians can stay in Spain and in any other Schengen country for up to 90 days within a 6-month period without needing a tourist visa. What is the Schengen area? It's a 28 countries group of countries in Europe that are internally borderless. Okay. Some other nationalities will be required to obtain a Schengen visa to enter anywhere in this area as tourists. For example, the Philippines. Okay. Now, if you want to stay in any of these Schengen countries for more than those 90 days, you need to secure a different type of visa. It can be a temporary or a long-term visa. Generally speaking, the non-lucrative visa or non-lucrative residency is a temporary visa or temporary residency because it grants you residency permits for up to 5 years. Okay, so if a residency in Spain is for longer than 5 years, it's considered to be a long-term residence, also known as the permanent residency. What is the difference between the visa and the residency? The visa is the paper that is sticked into your passport, and then you enter Spain and you obtain your tarjeta de identidad extranjero or residency card, which is the plastic card with your face, and that is the residency. And then the visa expires and you have the non-lucrative residence via your tarjeta de identidad extranjero or TIE card. Now, if you're citizens of any of the European Union countries or associate countries, or you are married or are legal partners of an EU passport holder, you would be exempt of, for example, this type of visa, non-lucrative visa. Okay, there are other ways in which you can stay in Spain that are much easier and give you certain more rights. Okay, for example, residency options for spouses of EU passport holders. Okay, via the EU family card, they will give you residence for up to 5 years. Okay, you don't have to renew them anytime during those 5 years, and they will include a work permit. Also, the financial requirements, if you don't plan to work, are much less than the non-lucrative visa. Therefore, if you have the option to obtain an European passport, or you are married to a European passport holder, then it is much easier for you, and therefore the non-lucrative visa wouldn't be a pathway for you to stay in Spain. Now, let's talk about some tax considerations. The most important concept is tax residency, and you would become a tax resident in Spain, and you, therefore, will have to pay tax on your global income and potentially on the net value of your assets if any of the following conditions apply. If you spend over 183 days in Spain within a calendar year from January 1st to December 31st, those days don't need to be consecutive, and it doesn't matter your immigration status. For example, if you enter Spain at the beginning of the year as a tourist and you spend 20 days as a tourist in Spain, those days count towards the tax residency in Spain. So you have to be careful. The second condition that could make you a tax resident in Spain is if your main economic activity or primary income source is in Spain. And the third condition is if your family, spouse, or minor children are permanent residents in Spain. Okay, so it's important that you have that in mind. A few taxes to have in view: the income tax, okay, with progressive rates that range from 19 to 47%, the Form 720, where you declare your overseas assets to the Spanish tax authorities, the regional wealth tax that will vary depending on the region where you move to, the solidarity tax, which is a nationwide wealth tax, and many other types of taxes. Something to have in mind is that Spain has double taxation agreements with the US, UK, Canada, and Australia, and many more countries in order to avoid being taxed twice. So it's important that you understand that regional rules vary significantly, and it is extremely important that you consult with a tax advisor even before taking the decision to move to Spain. Okay, and this is to address a very common misconception. Imagine, and so that you understand how the tax brackets work. Imagine that you make a taxable income of 100,000 euros per year, just to make round numbers, and for illustrative purposes only. The progressive tax brackets, if you look at on the right, the fifth bracket, income from 60,000 to 300,000 euros, pay 45% tax. So if you make 100K, you're going to pay 45% tax. No. In fact, the way the progressive tax breaks work is that for the first 12,450 euros, you will pay 19%. For the next 7,500 euros, you will pay 24%, etc., etc. Therefore, you will be paying an effective tax rate of approximately 36% if you make a taxable income of 100,000 euros. Okay. Now, if you want to know more about taxes, this is an NLV webinar, obviously, but everything is related. So I think it is very important to have that in mind. But if you want to know more and go deeper into Spanish tax overview, you can join my webinar that I have every 15 days. Now, let's go through the non-lucrative visa documentation. This is a summary list. So we're going to go in depth into each one of the most important ones. First, I will ask you where you plan to move to Spain, the address in Spain. Now, it will depend on each consulate how strict they are with this question, okay? Some consulate will just want to know to which province you will be moving. Seville, Valencia, Malaga, Santander, etc. Okay. Some other consulates, for example, Chicago, Boston, they will want you to show a rental contract before even moving to Spain, which is absolutely crazy. It is a very strict interpretation of the rules. And actually, I have interviewed Ainhoa Manero, the chief immigration lawyer at Stern Abogados, which I highly recommend. And I asked her about this requirement. Is this even legal? And she says, actually, no. Like a consulate asking you for a rental contract in advance before even granting you the visa is not. It is an absolute crazy interpretation. And she always fights this and she always wins this. But of course, she understands that many people, in order to not get any friction or problems with the consulate, will comply with this requirement by showing some Airbnb booking, for several months, etc., etc. Now, the second thing is address in country of residence. You will have to prove that you are a legal resident within the jurisdiction of a certain consulate where you are applying for the non-lucrative visa. You do this by showing your driving license. For example, in the US, in the UK, you show other documents, like, for example, you can show property deeds, or you can show even like utility bills where your name and your address appears all in one place. Now, you will also have to prove sufficient financial means to support yourself and dependents, if you bring some dependents, without working. And this is very, very important. When you apply the non-lucrative for the NLV at a consulate, the consulate cannot have the slightest doubt that you may potentially go back to work. Then have comprehensive health insurance for a company, from a company authorized to operate in Spain. Or if you're a UK retiree, you can actually apply via an S1 form for the access to the Spanish healthcare system once you move to Spain. And with that, you can, let's say, avoid providing a private health insurance. You will have to show a clean criminal background check, a medical certificate. If you plan to move to Spain with your spouse or dependent children, then you will have to provide marriage certificate, birth certificates. And as I said, you will have to prove that you won't engage in any work or professional activities in Spain. Many consulates ask for a letter of intent, not always, but sometimes it will be also useful to provide one in order to explain your situation to the officer reviewing your case. As I said, you have to provide other documentation like marriage, birth certificates if you're planning to move with dependents, school enrollment in many consulates if you're moving with kids, children, and sometimes rental contracts. As I said, it's a strict interpretation, but it is happening. And also provide photographies, payment of the fees, etc., etc. This is a summary. Okay, we're going to go through the details. But if you want to know the top 55 questions, frequently asked questions about the non-lucrative visa, you can watch on Spainguru's YouTube channel these 2 interviews of 20 minutes each with Ainhoa Manero, who I just mentioned, where she answers each of the questions very patiently, and she's a lawyer. So I highly recommend you watching that video as well. Now, let's go to specifically the financial requirements for the NLV in 2025. You need to show proof of sufficient funds. How much money you need to show, and it can be savings and or regular income. So a combination of two can also be, well, the first and main applicant has to show 400% of the IPREM index value. Since the IPREM in 2024 or IPREM 2025 is the same because they have stayed the same. Each dependent has to show 100% of the IPREM as well. This translated into euros is 28,800 euros for the main applicant and 7,200 euros for each dependent. Therefore, and you can see a table on the right, if you're applying as a couple, it's 28.8K plus 7.2K, total 36K. As I said, it can be savings and or passive income. For example, pension withdrawals, rental income, dividends, and be careful with rental income because several consulates don't consider this source of income as a very safe type of source because of course, tenants can stop paying you, and therefore you could be without that income. So it should be only used as an auxiliary source of income, just to make your case even stronger. How do you prove that income? Showing bank statements and documentation from your bank wherever you have the money or you are receiving those payments. Okay, and we're going to go through some new requirements from the consulates as of May 20th, 2025 about the documentation from your banks. Now, some consulates will also ask for tax returns, even for several years of tax returns. And very important, you need to have in mind that you may need double the amount of the original application for the renewal of the visa. And I put double between two asterisks because it is not really double the amount, but it is because when you renew your non-lucrative visa, you will renew it for a period of 2 years. When you first apply for the non-lucrative visa, it will grant you a residency for just 1 year. So the authorities want to see that you have enough money for 1 year. But when you renew, they will give you 2 years. So the authorities will want to see that you can sustain yourself for the next 2 years, right? We're going to go through a calculation later on, so you see a specific case scenario on how to calculate that. Before we mentioned that the IPREM index stayed the same in 2025, the same as in 2024, and in fact the same as in 2023. So it's like more than 2 years that it doesn't change. But you have to be careful because this IPREM, as you can see, there you can see the yearly progression since 2004, it only went up. So this IPREM index, if there is political agreement, because this is an index that gets published every time there is a national budget, a new national budget, usually at the beginning of the year, there is or not political agreement. But if there is political agreement, something that hasn't happened in the last 3 years, but if in 2026 there is political agreement, maybe they update the IPREM index to 650 euros per month, which will raise the main applicant financial threshold to 31,200 euros. This is a potential. This is something that I am just illustrating for you, but something that you have to plan accordingly, because maybe you apply for the NLV this year with the IPREM of 600 euros per month, but when you renew in 1 more year or afterwards for the second renewal, maybe the IPREM has gone up. So you have to plan accordingly, okay? We mentioned that there is new documentation published by several consulates lately, and also, for example, the case of Manchester Consulate, they are asking for the new documentation, but they haven't updated the website. They're asking for certain certificates that are quite common in banks in Spain, yes, and that's probably why they have started to ask this documentation, but it is not that common in banks abroad, okay? They're asking for, what they want to know, what they want to understand is that the financial documentation that you provide matches perfectly with your identity and with the story that you are telling, okay, in order to avoid fraud, right? They want to have a certificate from the bank that expresses that you as a person, you are the owner or the person who opened certain bank account, the full number, okay, of that bank account. Many people choose to blur the bank account number for privacy reasons, but they don't want that. They want to see that you are the real owner, that the bank says that you are the owner of this bank account, that the number of the bank account is that specific number, okay? They want to see when you did open that bank account or if you closed it in the past, okay? They want to see the history of that bank account. They want to also see what the balance of the bank account was as of December 31st of the previous year. So if you're applying in 2024, they want to know how much money exactly was in the bank account by December 31st, 2024. And another certificate that is not common, the average balance for the previous year, the average monthly balance, no, in that account, okay? And I will show you this. I extracted from my own bank. I use BBVA in Spain. This is quite common certificate, okay? The bank certificates that I am the owner of this number of bank account in Spain, okay? And it is an official certificate with a wet stamp. Even though this is not a paper, I downloaded it from my bank app. They put, let's say, an image there that looks like a stamp, okay? Then this is the famous wet ink stamp that authorities want to see, but not many banks can provide this. But as you can understand, the authorities are looking at what it is common in Spain, and then they translate these requirements to the different consulates in the different countries. But of course, the different countries will have banks that operate differently and can or not provide with these certificates. Now, in the very probable case in which your bank can provide this type of certificates. I have interviewed Ainhoa Manero and asked her about these new financial requirements, and she is telling everyone that you don't have to get nervous because many people is in your same situation in which the bank cannot provide this type of certificates. But if you provide whatever you have and you explain it and you try to provide the certificate that is closest to what the requirements are asking, you will be fine. For example, she even suggests that if your bank doesn't provide a general balance or a monthly balance of your bank account in 2004, you can print an Excel page, simple, concise, in which you explain the different balances that you have every month, and then you do a calculation of the average balance. You notarize it, okay, so to make it look official, and then you submit this. This is something that the consulates should be able to accept. Please watch the video because it is quite interesting, and I'm also going to record this week an update for cases that she is having in the different consulates, specifically about these financial requirements. Another question, we mentioned that consulate will not want to have the slightest doubt of you potentially working while on a non-lucrative visa, okay? Now, the law says that you should not be working, okay, in Spain, but it doesn't say anything about working remotely for a non-Spanish company. And again, I asked Ainhoa Manero, immigration lawyer, and it's not me who is saying it, but this is a gray area, in fact. Once you have obtained your non-lucrative visa with passive income, with your savings, and not using active income, the truth is that once you are in Spain, there is nothing that says that you should not be working remotely. It is a gray area. Actually, there is a Supreme Court case that supports this situation. Okay, so it is very easy to defend. No one has ever had any problem being under a non-lucrative visa already and working remotely. I know people who are doing this and have done this in the past. I have never heard there is a problem, that there is any problem with the renewal, as long as if you comply with the requirements, the renewal requirements for the non-lucrative visa. Okay, people pay their taxes on their global income, and tax authorities are not linked to the immigration authorities. So this is the situation as well. Please watch the video as well, because I'm not recommending you to be doing this. Now there is a digital nomad visa, okay, especially designed for people who work for non-Spanish companies on a remote basis, which didn't exist before 2023. So probably this visa is more suitable than being in a gray area, okay? But the non-lucrative visa is, let's say, an older visa that was created back in the day when it was not that common to have remote work. So this is the situation about working remotely under a non-lucrative residence, okay? And just to underline this gray area, and also the fact that every consulate is so different, you can check Edinburgh Consulate that officially lists among the requirements the possibility to be working under certain jobs, okay, in the UK and still obtain the non-lucrative visa. This is the case of someone who, and someone in the Spainguru community was granted this visa, even if the husband was working at an oil rig in the Northern Sea. I also asked Ainhoa about this, and she has had successful cases of pilots, for example, airplane pilots who worked only once every 2 months or once a month, who flew from Spain to USA in order to work and do like a long haul flight and then come back to Spain on the non-lucrative visa. So it is not, like black and white about working, okay? But of course, if you are in this situation, I extremely recommend you to go with professional help to get the right advice, and also with people who are extremely knowledgeable about these situations, okay? And as I said, you can find on Spainguru.es. Now, let's talk about the private health insurance requirements. So, unless you are a UK retiree, as we said, you can use the S1 form to access the public healthcare system. You will need a compliant health insurance policy that has to have the certain conditions. First, no co-payments. Second, reimbursements. Not all the consulates state this, but a few do, okay? This is the case of Houston. I see people who get health insurance policies with reimbursement clauses, and I say that they're taking a risk that maybe you shouldn't take. So be careful with that. No waiting periods. You should be covered from the moment in which you set your foot into Spanish territory. Full coverage with nuances. We're going to talk about this. Full coverage That means that you are covered for everything, any medical problem that you may have. Okay, this is what the law says. But then we're going to talk about that. And in 99% of cases, you will have to pay 1 year in advance, so a yearly payment in advance, because all or most of the health insurance companies will require this full year in advance payment in order to issue the certificate of coverage in Spanish, which has to have a specific wording in order to be compliant for the non-lucrative visa application. Let's go to the frequently asked questions. Are my medicines cost covered with a private health insurance? No, you will have to pay retail price. What should be the health insurance start date? There's many answers to this question, but the most common answer is if you plan to move to Spain on September 15th, if you start your health insurance on September 1st, you're good. Are there health insurance for older than 75 years of age? Yes. For example, DKV and Adeslas have NLV compliant health insurance policies for people of older than this age. What if I have pre-existing conditions? So I'm going to circle back to the full coverage insurance conditions. So this is the situation. Two things. First, how severe those pre-existing conditions are. For example, if there are severe conditions, if you have had cancer diagnosis in the last 5 years, within the last 5 years, probably you will not be able to get NLV compliant private health insurance. Okay, you will have to wait until those 5 years have passed, to give you an example. So unfortunately, you won't be able to get covered in that situation. Now, if the pre-existing conditions were not as severe, for example, high blood pressure, these kind of things, okay, what can happen is that private health insurance may decide to cover you and provide you with an NLV compliant policy with a certificate of coverage in Spanish, so that you can get the visa, but they will exclude the pre-existing conditions. So once you move to Spain, if you have a medical problem related to those conditions, they will not cover you for the treatment, and that will be excluded. The option that you have is that after 1 year residence, you may use something called the Convenio Especial and pay the access into the public healthcare system. But once you have it, your pre-existing condition treatment will be included. Okay, and can I pay into the Spanish public health system? As I said, after 1 year of residence, you can do it. You will pay approximately 60 euros per month if you are younger than 65, and 157 euros per month if you're older than 65. Still under the Convenio Especial, and once you have access to the public healthcare system, the medicines you will have to pay retail price for your medicines. Okay, you can only have access to subsidized medicine if you pay Social Security as a worker and you have full access to those subsidies as well. Can I use my current health insurance from the UK and USA? Short answer is, if it's NLV compliant, yes. But the long answer is, I highly don't recommend it. And it is much easier and I think much cheaper to use a Spanish company who is providing a compliant health insurance policy. You can have several blocks and friction if you use your own health insurance from abroad, like the certificate of coverage will not be in Spanish. You will have to swan translate it, which is expensive. Maybe it doesn't have the right wording. Probably has reimbursement clauses or co-payment clauses. These kind of things. It could be considered to be a travel health insurance. There's many problems that it could have. So I highly recommend not using one of those. Can I apply with a UKS1 form if I am a UK retiree? Yes. And you begin the process. You don't finish it. You begin the process. You show the documentation that you have begun the process. You get your non-lucrative visa, you move to Spain, you get your TIE card, and then you finish the process. So it can take a long time before you have effective access to the public healthcare in Spain. Therefore, it is not a requirement, but it is highly recommended that you have some sort of private health insurance coverage for that time in which you don't have still access to the public healthcare system. Do I need a Spanish bank account to hire these insurances? No. If you happen to have a Spanish bank account, maybe the health insurance policy gives you the option to pay on a monthly basis instead of paying a full year in advance. That could happen, okay? Can I pay on a monthly basis? As I said, usually not, but if you have a Spanish IBAN, maybe you can. Can there be reimbursements? As I said, it is a tricky question, okay? People have been accepted with reimbursement clauses in their health insurance, excuse me, but certain consulates literally say that you shouldn't be using reimbursement clauses health insurance policies. So you are taking a risk. Will I get a refund if I am denied? Excuse me. Well, you have to read the conditions of your policy that you are signing. You need to ask your exclusive agent or your broker or the company that you're dealing with for the contract that you will sign. Before signing, you need to read the full contract, and you need to pay attention to the cancellation clause and see what you're signing. Because it will depend what you're signing will be one thing. It could be a full refund, no question asked. It could be a partial fund, no question asked. It could be a refund only if the reason for denial of the visa was because of the health insurance. It could be a non-refund clause, like zero refund. Okay, so discuss that and make sure that you understand what you're signing. What are the top companies in Spain? The first one on top, Adeslas. Then you have Asisa, DKV, ASA, Salus, Caser, Sanitas, AXA, Mafre. All these companies are good companies, all of them. Okay, I personally don't see any much difference. I have used 3 of them in my more than 20 years in Spain, and they were all more or less the same. Okay, and many people say like, oh, how are the doctors of this company in this area, or how are they? Look, every year some doctors go in and go out of the with working with a certain company. All right, every year they negotiate who is inside one company or another. So maybe something makes sense on during the first year or the first 2 years, but I'm absolutely positive that after 5 years, all the different doctors stopped working with a company and went to another, or there is mobility of the doctor. So in general, I recommend you working with any of these companies. Okay, of course, the more you investigate, the better it is, but as I said, it is not very, very easy to understand what the best company will be in your area. Okay, because of the certain amount of doctors in that specific area, etc., etc. Of course, at the first year, if you investigate and this one is the one that you choose because of you did investigation, great. But don't think that that will stay in time, if you understand. Now, size matters. Adesla is by far the biggest, the largest company in Spain. About 26% of Spanish people have also private health insurance, me included. Adesla is the largest. Then you have Sanitas, Asisa, DKV, and many other companies that I just mentioned. Now, this is a specific case. Someone mentioned that at Washington, D.C., the BLS website was trying to sell the person a travel health insurance, but it is quite ironic or contradictory with the official requirements page of both the BLS and the consulate that says that travel insurance will not be accepted. And this is obviously a glitch from BLS, who is trying to sell you a non-compliant health insurance. So be careful with that. Only use compliant health insurance. If you need one, I highly recommend you go on spainguru.es/health insurance. I work with Carlos Blanco, an exclusive agent for Adeslas, who is not only an agent, but also an expert immigration lawyer who has done thousands of health insurance policies for non-lucrative visa holders, and he knows every detail and the ins and outs and the timeline, and he knows everything. So basically, you're in very, very good hands. And another advantage that you have working with him is that he can extend in time the start date of your health insurance for several months, which is something that many companies cannot do. You hire the health insurance policy, and then after 1 month you need to start it, and they're quite strict about that. And this is something that you really, really have to have in mind, because you need to, in my opinion, in many cases, you need to have some sort of flexibility in order to start your health insurance policy after, if different things can happen, of course. Here you have a few reviews. People are really, really happy with Carlos. So definitely someone to take into consideration if you plan to get a private health insurance for your NLV. Now let's talk about the medical certificate. It has nothing to do with health insurance. It is a separate paper. Basically, it's a certificate signed by a doctor saying that you are not, you don't have infectious disease listed by the, medical protocol of 2005. We're talking about like yellow fever, this kind of things. Okay, so this is a one-page document that has a validity of 3 months, and it has to be valid when you submit the documents. That is signed by a doctor. Depending on the country, it will have certain requirements than in other countries. For example, in the UK, you need to apostille this certificate, whereas in the US, as far as I understand, in the US, you don't need to apostille it. Okay, in Canada, it's not very clear. Actually, in the last NLV Q&A session, I was a bit confused about that, and I need to clarify it, and hopefully I will record a video clarifying the need of apostilling not only the medical certificate for Canada, but also other documents, okay, like marriage and birth certificates. But certainly in the UK, you need to apostille. In order to do this, the doctor needs to be FCDO registered with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then, as you can see there, you have a template. That template on the top is in English, and in the bottom is in Spanish. If you can use such a template, because if the doctor needs to sign both parts, for sure, you will save the sworn translation because it will also be in Spanish. Okay, if you are only providing the English version, you will have to sworn translate it into Spanish. And be careful because, and use always a template from the consulates, because it has to have a specific wording and the doctor should not modify the wording. Okay, like to the best of my knowledge, or I think that. No, it has to have a certain wording. Okay, in the USA, you don't need to apostille it, although there was a person in Chicago that was required to apostille it, so this person had to notarize it and then apostille the notarization of this certificate. But that was a very, very isolated case in that I never heard of again, but it did happen. That's why I'm here to bring it to your attention. But in the US, it's enough if you print the template into an official looking paper with the doctor's letterhead, and then the signature in both parts with a wet stamp ink, which is not easy to find anymore, but try to make it look as official as possible. Remember the validity of 3 months, okay? And this is a table that basically condenses all that I just told you. Now, sometimes you will not have the possibility to use a local doctor for any reason, okay? And let's go back to the previous slide. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy, but the first frequently asked question here says, my doctor won't sign the medical certificate template. What can I do? Change doctor, okay? Imagine that you don't find a doctor also. Well, you can use a Spanish doctor, okay? And this is all done online. You can go to spainguru.es. Let me see if I can share with you the screen. I go to services of Spanish visas and medical certificate, okay? And here I have 2 options, right? And you have medical certificate from a Spanish doctor, or in the UK, you can also use Zoom Doc with a discount. I think it's £10 discount that I have here for you, but you can access the Spanish doctor, okay? What is the advantage of the Spanish doctor? Excuse me, I was sick all weekend and my voice is running out. The Spanish doctor will issue a certificate that is fully in Spanish, okay? Therefore, you don't need to translate it and you don't need to apostille it, okay? You just fill this form and you contact the Spanish doctor and then you do a Zoom call or a WhatsApp call, and then it will be, the certificate will be issued, okay? Now, again, some consulates have had in the past a severe or more strict interpretation of the rules, and they have asked that the applicant had to be physically present in Spanish territory when the Spanish doctor issued the certificate. This is the case of Manchester Consulate, for example, okay? But for example, London Consulate, Edinburgh Consulate, Miami Consulate are widely accepting the certificate of a Spanish doctor, even if you're not physically present in Spain when the certificate has been issued. The best you can do is to contact the doctor if you need, and here you will select what consulate you're applying from, and the doctor will tell you, yes, my health certificate is accepted at your consulate, or not, I have problems in the past, etc., etc. But this is an option that I give you on spainguru.es. Excuse me, I will drink a little bit of water. Okay. All right, let's continue. The next slide. This is the table that I mentioned. This is the specific case of someone who needed to apostille in Chicago. And then we're going to go to clean criminal background check, the document that takes the longest to obtain. Usually, not always, okay? But the FBI background check, the ACRO, usually takes several weeks to obtain and also several weeks to get an apostille for those, okay? So you have to plan accordingly because those certificates need to be valid at the time of submission. Usually they have a 6-month validity, usually, okay? Always check with your consulate. Has to be clean for the last 5 years, okay? You shouldn't have nothing in the last 5 years. And in the after 5 years, so older stuff, you have to be careful because if there are serious criminal records, you may be denied. If that is your situation, always check with a professional immigration lawyer because there are ways to get approved even with certain offenses. If you have the possibility, you can go through a process of expungement of the criminal records so they don't show when you submit this certificate, when you apply for this visa, okay? And usually if you have a misdemeanor, something small like smoking pot or driving under the influence, older than 5 years, there's usually not a problem, usually. But as I said, if you have records, always, in my opinion, you should use an immigration lawyer who will fight for you if you have any friction in the process, okay? What they do is that they check your situation and they check in the Spanish penal system, and if in Spain these records should have been deleted and yours weren't in your origin country, they can make the case that that record shouldn't exist, therefore they should be applied, and that's what they do, okay? Now, for British people, am I still eligible if I have a no live trace? So you cannot see the criminal record underlying under that no live trace. So consulates are asking for an extra report explaining what that is, okay? What type of criminal record you have. Can I expedite the background check federal apostille? Something important is that for the FBI background check in the US, there's only the federal apostille that is being accepted, okay? You cannot notarize your, you cannot use, first of all, a state criminal check. It is said sometimes that if you have lived in the last 5 years in one specific state, you can use the state criminal background check, but it is not widely accepted anymore. So always use FBI background check and the federal apostille for it. Can I expedite the federal apostille? The answer is no, but you can use certain private services for apostilles. You can find on Spainguru.es that can get you the federal apostille in as short time as only 10 working days, compared to 4 to 6 weeks normally that you have to wait for the federal apostille. Can I answer that one? Where can I have my fingerprints taken in the US? You can go to a USPS office, or you can go to a channeler's office, private office, and they scan your fingerprints. Or you can also do it at home. You get a form and you put ink into your fingerprints, and you do it, analogically. You put that in an envelope and you send it to the FBI. You can also do that. What if my fingerprints are illegible? If that's your case, and that happens to certain senior people, that their fingerprints fade out with time, and scanners cannot read those fingerprints, and they have problems to get their FBI background checks. If that is your case, send me an email to hello@spainguru.es, and I will send you links to certain contents where people have proposed different solutions that they worked for them. And these are some screenshots from the community. I recently asked how long was the ACRO in the UK taking. It was taking about 5 to 6 weeks. In Canada, there's no longer the wait, such a long wait for the apostille. It used to take months. Now it's only taking a few days or weeks to get your apostille for your police check in Canada, which are great news. Now let's talk about the proof of not working, okay? So people call the non-lucrative visa normally the retirement visa, because this is what the usual case, okay, the usual use case, okay? Someone who retires wants to retire in Spain, so they show proof of a receipt of a pension, and that it is understood or can consider very safe by any consulate that you will not engage in work activities now or in the future, okay? But if you're planning to retire and you're still working, okay, that's another story. A lot of people want to work until the very end because they're not sure they're going to get the visas, so they don't want to quit their jobs yet, okay? And that's a very valid reason. In fact, I asked this to Ainhoa from Stern Abogados, and she said that actually this is a right that you have. You don't have to quit in order to apply for the visas in many consulates. Some consulates are extremely strict with this, okay? But she will always make the case if that is the situation. If that is your situation, I highly recommend you also going with a lawyer, okay? If that is not the situation, what the consulates want in general is that you have resigned at the time of application. And in the UK, you will prove this submitting a P45, in the US, a resignation letter or termination letter from your employer, both sworn, translated, and notarized. And if you're freelancers, in the US, a notarized affidavit promising not to work, and in the UK, a letter from HMRC and accountants stating having ceased trading and registered for self-employment, okay? So the frequently asked question, should I quit before I get the visa? It is not very, very clear. Depending on the consulate, they will be more open to this situation than others. I will talk about specific case in Houston, for example, that they were not open to that situation, but in many other consulates, they are. Let's look at that later on. Is renting out a property considered a job? Depends. If you have 1 or 2 properties and you rent them on a long-term basis, it is passive income. You don't have operations, okay? You just get paid, etc. But if you have 30 properties and you have them on Airbnb, it could be understood that that is a business. Therefore, people suggest hiring a property manager. If you have something in between those two extreme cases, let's say, be careful, okay? This will be up to the officer reviewing your case to consider if it is a business operation or it's just passive income. Is investing in stocks considered active income? No. Can I volunteer while on an NLV? Yes, absolutely, but you should not get paid for anything, for lunches, for trips, for anything. Still working at the time of application. I have here compiled a few screenshots about people commenting in the different countries. What's the perspective of the consulates regarding for people who are working at the time of application and didn't quit? So someone says a P45 is one way in the UK, but so is a letter from your employer stating that you have resigned and will leave on a certain date. Now, people have done this lately, and the BLS office said that they should provide a P45, and they were very strict about it. This is the situation. Someone said, looks like it's a bit of a potluck if they accept a letter from HR department in place of a P45, if working to the last minute. And someone recently asked this for Manchester, and the answers weren't clear. Okay, so this is the situation in the UK. They're quite strict about you quitting your job before applying. Now, US consulates tend to be more open to that situation. Okay, for example, Los Angeles, DC consulate. But on the 5th of June, so 25 days ago, someone posted about Houston and said that I'm posting this in case somebody's in a similar situation. I find it useful. Today I went to my appointment at BLS Houston. My documents were not accepted. The reason of the declination was that I presented a letter from my employer stating that my retirement date was in the future, and but before the visa start date was going to happen, and they didn't want to take the documentation. Okay, so be careful with that. Yeah. In that case, you should go, honestly, my recommendation, with a lawyer, with an immigration expert, okay, if you're in the situation, because they will fight for this, because that is asking people to resign before applying for the non-lucrative visa is a strict interpretation of the rules, okay? So a lawyer that knows their business will fight for it. Now, I'm going to give you an example here of someone, a Venezuelan national who applied for the non-lucrative visa at the Buenos Aires consulate, who got the visa denied because this person showed activity in their LinkedIn profile. Okay, this person went to court against the consulate in Madrid and lost. The court said that the consulate was right, that this person was showing activity in LinkedIn, and therefore should not be issued a non-lucrative visa. So be careful with that. As I said, when you're applying at the consulate, there should not be the slightest doubt that you are engaging, or you pretend to engage into work. Okay, basically. Okay. Also, someone recently sent me an email saying like, "Oh, I got denied because I sent this letter of intent," and this person showed me the letter of intent and said, I could read in the letter of intent that this person wanted to take a sabbatical year on the non-lucrative visa, and then the letter of intent said, after that year, I want to modify my non-lucrative residence to a work permit in Spain. Okay, and this is something that you perfectly can do, but this person got denied because of saying it. So you see, this person was absolutely honest in their plans, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing this. But I could perfectly see why someone in the consulate denied this person. Okay, you shouldn't even mention that. Okay, so this is the situation today. Of course, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I'm not recommending you anything. I'm just putting here, bringing to your attention what other users and what things are happening in different consulates, so you take your own conclusions. Now, let's talk about marriage, birth certificates, and non-married couples. Okay, first, married couples will need a valid and updated marriage certificate. Okay, so don't take your marriage certificate from 1975, because you will need to get a valid original copy of your marriage certificate that needs to be sworn translated and needs to have an apostille issued by the authorities that issued that certificate. Usually the marriage certificate, unless stated otherwise, is valid for 6 months. And the same, if you're applying with children, you will need the new original copies of the birth certificates, again, sworn translated and apostille. Now, non-married couples can apply, but they need to prove their relationship. And recently, in the new regulation of the law, valid as of May 20th, 2025, they made more specific what type of documentation you can provide in order to apply as a non-married couple. The strongest case is providing that you are a legal partners. You're legal partners, okay? So you provide a certificate and documentation, and or at least 1 year of cohabitation, okay? You need to prove that, okay? You don't need to provide 1 year of cohabitation if you have children together, right? So those are the things that will be accepted if you're non-married couples. Otherwise, the solution is to apply as two main applicants, which therefore have different financial requirements. The certificates, as we said, need to be apostilled and they need to be soon translated. What about adult children and ascendants? Unfortunately, after May 20th, 2025, they cannot be dependents any longer and must apply as main applicants as of May 20th, 2025. They could, but now not anymore. And here's the Article 61 of the new Reglamento de Extranjería that underlines in red everything that I just said, okay? If you want to read the law and the regulation. We mentioned sworn translations, but what are exactly sworn translators? Sworn translators are accredited by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. No one else can accredit sworn translators, okay? They pass a hard exam to become certified. Each sworn translator has a unique registration number that you can consult online. Their translations are accepted by all Spanish institutions, including consulates. Okay, translations are done remotely and signed with a legally valid signature. Therefore, no physical mail is needed. You scan your original documents, you contact the sworn translator quotes you, tells you when the sworn translation will be delivered, and they will send you a scan of the documents with a stamp on it, okay, with their unique registration number. Of course, you can find recommended sworn translators on Spainguru.es. They're very used to provide sworn translation for the non-lucrative visa application. Can I use a sworn translator from the American Translator Association? This is something that I mentioned because Miami Consulate and Los Angeles Consulate mentioned this association, and they used to have links to it. But actually, what you need is a sworn translator accredited by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You don't need a translator that is member of the American Translator Association. It has nothing to do with it, except that you have translators, but you need a sworn translator, this special type of translator, okay, to be official. Can a sworn translator work with several language pairs? No, they only work with one language pair. For example, English-Spanish, Spanish-English, or German-Spanish, Spanish-German, okay? So if you need, so how much do sworn translators cost? Usually for the documents that are common for the NLV, it's about 40 euros per page, okay? And then what comes first, apostille, then sworn translation? So depending who you ask, okay? Because, for example, I know at Sterna, they have in-house sworn translators. So the cost is flat, let's say. So they sworn translate absolutely everything, every comma, okay? Even the apostilles. But many people will actually try to save some sworn translator cost. For example, for the bank statements. Yes, I ran a poll about the bank statements. Did you sworn translate all your bank statements? Almost 80% said that they didn't translate them. They showed the bank statement in English, but about 20% said that they translated only the summary pages, and 3% translated everything, for example. This is the situation, okay? They're the ones who don't translate everything, they're taking a risk, but it is normally not problematic, right? So it will depend sometimes, okay? It is clear that, for example, the background checks, the needs to be sworn translated. The birth certificates, marriage certificates need to be sworn translated. The medical certificate, if it's only in English, needs to be sworn translated, okay? Now, the apostilles of these documents doesn't need to be sworn translated. It will depend on the officer reviewing your case, okay? Depending on the country, the apostilles will come also in Spanish as well, but the text that comes in Spanish in the apostille, it is insufficient, okay? So if the officer wants, they can say that you haven't sworn translate everything, but many people choose not to sworn translate the apostille itself. They will, for example, get the FBI background check, scan it, send it to a sworn translator by email. Meanwhile, they will send the physical print to get the apostille, okay? They will receive the sworn translation by email, and then they will receive the original physical document with the physical apostille by mail, and that's what they will be submitting, okay, to the NLV application together with the scanned sworn translated document. So this is what happens regarding the translations. And as I mentioned here, you can find in services for Spanish visas, sworn translators. You can find all these sworn translators that I highly recommend you to use. Specifically translate, they can deal with any language pair for sworn translator, because a lot of people said like, oh, I got married in Germany, I got married in France, etc. I cannot find sworn translator for those language pairs. Well, you can use this company here that you can find on Spainguru.es, okay? Now, this is the poll about bank statements. Couple of videos here where I interviewed not only Ainhoa, but also Sofia from CABR Relocation Solutions. She's also a very experienced immigration lawyer. And I have a couple of videos about the non-lucrative visa frequently asked questions as well that I highly recommend you to watch. Remember that we're going to have a Q&A session at the end after this presentation. If you need to leave earlier for any reason, please leave a Trustpilot review. If you think the information I'm sharing today with you is useful, there on the top green bar with the red button, you can leave a Trustpilot review. Now let's continue. And now we're going to talk about during the application. Something new, another new slide, many changes after May 20th. Okay, the application process. All family members must apply. All of them need to pay their fees, fill the forms, etc. In most cases, especially when dealing with BLS office, you will need to do an in-person application. You will have to get an appointment, which is very hard to get lately in most places, unfortunately. And you will have to attend, all of you, to that appointment. And the same for the pickup, okay? Many BLS offices, they will give you the option or the service to send you the passport back to a certain address, but many of them will require that you go in person to pick them up, and they will keep your passports. Okay. Now, until now, the non-lucrative visa would grant you a 90-day window to arrive in Spain, but this is changing as we speak. Okay. Why is this? And you can see there a screenshot of someone who provided this visa, that this person got granted 22nd of June 2025 until the 21st of June 2026 for a full year, 365 days. Why is this changing? Because many people, or everyone, got their 90-day visa period. They enter Spain. They won't be able to get the appointments to get the residency cards. The visa would expire, and then they would be in Spain without a visa in their passport and without the residency card. The authorities have acknowledged this situation, this gray situation, and they have decided to extend the visa validity, especially, in order so that you don't have problems or you are like stranded in Spain while your lucrative residence is being, you're trying to get an appointment to get your TIE card, basically, so you can travel around with your visa, etc., etc. Okay, this is something that just changed in the last couple of weeks. Sorry, and something that I didn't mention is that it is unclear. Like, it doesn't mean that you have like the full year to enter in Spain. Okay, this is where I understand. Okay, and take this with a pinch of salt, and this is not legal advice, but you will have, let's say, from the start date of the visa, you will have 90 days to enter Spain. Right, you have to do it within 90 days. Don't wait until the day number 364 of your visa validity to enter Spain. Okay, don't do that. Right now, it is not very, very clear, because all this is not very clearly stated in the regulation. All right, so it's happening as we speak. In any case, this is good news, but basically consider that you need to enter Spain within 90 days of the visa start date. Okay, even if it says that it will be valid for 365 days. And what they say is that once you obtain your TIE card, even if your visa is valid for longer after obtaining your TIE card, it will be, let's say, considered expired, because now you will have another document showing your immigration status, which is that you are, at least from an immigration standpoint, you will be a resident in Spain. Okay, someone was commenting about this lately, and basically, yes, it says the friendly staff at the embassy explained it's part of a new law to me. It is to allow freedom of movement while waiting for physical residency card, which sometimes can take a couple of months to backlog. Once the card is issued, the visa becomes invalid. The entry into Spain and applying for residence card should be within 90 days of the start date on the visa. And actually, once you enter Spain, you are legally required to obtain your residency card within 30 days. Okay, but it is very, very impossible that happens, and authorities are recognizing that situation. Now, common mistakes to avoid: not checking the specific consular requirements. You need to read them in English, in Spanish, read the BLS requirements, and also sometimes stay on top, be part of a community, because many people report that certain consulates, like Houston, for example, New York, have also internal requirements that they haven't published anywhere. Okay, that when you enter the office, they have a little piece of paper, stuck on the wall that has extra requirements for you. Okay, and these gentle people who are part of the community put them on the Facebook groups, and put those photos so that everyone don't make the same mistake that they did, and they don't miss the paper. So all those things, you need to read them, and you need to read them every now and then, like every 15 days, because they can update anything anytime, and you will not be able to complain because of that. Okay, so better that you stay on top of that. Another common mistake: showing wrong documents or expired documents, invalid documents, like a birth certificate from 1970. Okay, the document itself, wrong chronology. You start with an easy thing and you leave, for example, the police check at the very end, and then you get the appointment and you still didn't get your document apostilled. Wrong health insurance, for example, using health insurance with reimbursements in a consulate where they state that they don't want reimbursements, stuff like that. Say that you plan to work or not enough proof. For example, if you're a young person, 25 years old, there's no age limit for the NLV application. But they see you that you are 25 years old and you are in working age. So you need to prove very strongly that you don't plan to work. Okay, so you need to convince them that you're not going to work. Right? This has happened in the past. And actually, I have an interview of a New York City couple who got initially denied because they didn't convince enough the consulate that the husband wasn't going to work once they got their visas. Timing: how much in advance should I start preparing before moving to Spain? Usually, these are ballpark figures. In the US and Canada, 6 months before. In the UK, 4 to 5 months before, to allow time to get your documents. Most consulates will retain passports during the processing. Although someone was telling me in the NLV Q&A session last time that Manchester had the option to For example, they had a form in which you could request to keep your passport while the visa was being processed. Okay, but this is something that doesn't appear on the website or anything. So I'm very curious to know more about this, because what I hear is that Manchester was quite strict about keeping the passport. So again, it will depend on the consulate, but usually you need to count on leaving your passport. In the US, the applicants can get a second passport from the US authorities, which is quite easy to get a second passport. But in the UK, it is very difficult to get a second passport. Okay, as we said, sometimes they will require you to go pick up your passports in person, okay, and all the family members, if you apply with all your family. But sometimes they will give you the option to pay for a service to send you the passport wherever you are. How long does the process take? In general, ballpark figures, documents preparation 2 to 3 months, attending the appointment on the 3rd month, wait for the approval can be anything from 5 working days to even more than 3 months, but calculate more or less 2 months, and maximum officially 3 months. Although recently there was a change in the minimum time and in the maximum time officially to give you with an answer, and it should be 1 month now as per the new regulations. But I will have to see that with my own eyes, because the consulates still are overwhelmed. Even if they change the law, I don't think they will be able to give answers so quickly. But well, if that starts to happen, then amazing, right? Then potentially, if they require from you new documentation, they will give you 10 days period so that you provide that documentation. And now there's also a change in the regulation giving you a limit in which you should apply latest 2 months before the intended date of moving to Spain. Okay, so you can't apply, for example, today, Monday, June 30th, and ask for the visa to start next week. No, it has to be at least 2 months in advance. Okay, and up to 6 months before the intended date of moving to Spain, which can have some logistical problems. This is what the new regulation is telling you, but it can have some logistical problems that, as we mentioned before, for example, the health insurance start date. Even if you apply 6 months before your intended date of entry to Spain, what happens with the health insurance, right? So these are, unfortunately, like unanswered questions that come up now with the new regulation. And again, as said, once you enter Spain, you will have officially 30 days to obtain your TA card. That will be valid for 1 year. Someone said, you asked for the visa to be valid for up to 3 months in advance. However, the difficulty I found finding health insurance company who will work that far out, as most only do 2 months in advance. And recently, I would say that most of them only do 1. Now let's go to some visual slides just to show you how the process looks. I have 3 slides to see the process through different angles. First, submission date, letter A in orange. And as per previously, at least, you can choose your visa start date within 90 days from submission date, but now it should be minimum 2 months before the intended date. So imagine that you receive your visa is granted, and you decide to fly to Spain during the letter B, okay, in the letter B. They grant you the visa, and the visa is valid starting on letter B. As we said, now they're giving the visa valid for 365 days, but it is not clear that you have to arrive in Spain during the first 90 days, okay, even though you will see that the dates are valid for 365 days. Now, you enter Spain sometime during the first 90 days of a visa validity period, which is letter C. You enter Spain. Once you enter Spain and you get your visa stamped during a certain date, you will have 30 days officially to get an appointment at the police station or foreign office. They will take your fingerprints, they will look at the empadronamiento in 90% of cases, and you will get a tarjeta de identidad extranjero or TA card, which is your residency card that should start the date that you enter Spain under the visa validity period, and that will expire 1 year later. And then the renewal, you will renew your non-lucrative residence, and you can start to renew your visa residence as early as 60 days before the expiration date and up to 90 days after the expiration date, but no one recommends doing it after. Always start as early as possible. Another way to see the process here and understand that this is for illustration purposes only. Things can overlap. Something can come before, depending on your situation and the type of documents that you are submitting. But first, you have to find your consulate. Second, check the official requirements. Third, start with the difficult documentations. For example, FBI background check, the ACRO in the UK. If you married in a different jurisdiction, like Cyprus, South Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, let's say jurisdictions that are not very common, be careful because it can take time to get new birth certificates, new marriage certificates from those jurisdictions, and also takes time to get the apostille from those authorities, so plan accordingly. Then obtain a medical certificate that will be 3 months valid. and you have to apostille everything by the authorities that issued the certificates and sworn translate the documents that are in another language than Spanish, okay, the official ones at least. In the UK, also the medical certificate. You will sort out your private health insurance or obtain or start the process to obtain the S1 form to access the public healthcare system if you're a UK pensionist. Otherwise, you need a private health insurance, compliant one, of course. Book an appointment with the consulate/BLS office. And again, maybe this is something that you need to start even earlier due to the huge bottleneck that we have with the appointments. Then attend consular/BLS appointment in person or not, sometimes depending on the instructions. And then once you submit your paperwork, wait for notifications. Officially, as we said, it used to be 90 days. Now it changed to only 1 month to get a notification or an answer, but I have to see that with my own eyes. And then you will collect your visa and travel to Spain after the visa validity date of starting date of your visa. You can travel before as a tourist, but that can have bad consequences, okay? It is highly, highly recommended to enter Spain within the visa validity period. So you get a stamp in your visa, and the police, when they see your passport, once they have to issue your TIE, they issue the TIE card with the right starting date. Another way, sorry, I went too fast. Once you enter Spain, try to obtain an empadronamiento, which is the certificate of address where you're living in the certain city, in the city hall of the city. For example, you rent a property, you go with your rental contract with the city hall, and you get a certificate of empadronamiento. This is a proof of address that the police will require in 90% of the police stations that issue the TIE card. And finish by requesting your residency card, and then 1 year after, you will do your renewal. Another way to see the process is with the Gantt chart, where you see the time frames of the different things that you need to do. This is, if you can see here, each of the columns is a month, okay, that starts in January and ends in November. First, you will start with the harder stuff: police check, marriage certificate, birth certificate, who have a validity period of 6 months. You will apostille and sworn translate everything. You will then work with your financial documents from your banks, bank statements, tax returns, etc. Then you will get your medical certificate, which is valid 3 months. You will sworn translate if necessary, apostille if necessary. Then get your health insurance quite close to the appointment, which you should have started before to try to get, okay? The appointments, I mean. And then you will attend the appointment, you will process the visa, they will give you the visa, which will be valid for, supposedly now, every visa will be valid for a year. As I said, don't count on that, and potentially consider that you need to enter within the first 90 days of that visa start date, okay? Another process update for this application, as we said, should not be submitted no later than 2 months before your planned arrival to Spain, unless you justify exceptional reasons. And you can start as early as 6 months before, okay, which I still have to see with my own eyes, okay? And as we said, there is a deadline, an official deadline of 1 month from consulate communication. Okay, so the consulate receives your papers from the BLS office. The consulate sends this to the immigration office in Spain, in the specific province where you mentioned that you were going to move. And in 1 month, you should get a decision. And if there was no answer from their side, it was a default rejection, okay? And here we have Article 63 that describes the procedure and mention most of the things that I'm mentioning here, okay? Now let's go back to taxes. We talk about capital gains tax, especially for people who plan to sell their homes before moving to Spain. Many of your origin countries, you don't even have capital gains tax when you sell your homes. But in Spain, there is a CGT, and which is around, I think it ranges from 19% to 30%, but progressive rates depending on how much the capital gains are. Consider that it's going to be around 22% of the gains that you made from the sale. If you're a Spanish tax resident during the same calendar year in which you sold your home, okay? So the best way to avoid this is to time when you move to Spain so that you are not a Spanish tax resident when you sell your home. The best way to do it is the first case. You sell in 2025 and you move to Spain in 2026, okay? Because as you know, in January 1st, 2026 starts a new tax residence year, okay? A new tax year. But if you plan to sell your home in the same calendar year in which you will move to Spain, be careful. Spend less than 182 days in Spain. And remember that every immigration status counts. If you enter earlier during the year as a tourist, those days will count, and you will have to add to the sum of days during that year, okay? And once you become a tax resident in Spain, that on a particular year, you will be a tax resident from January 1st So let's say retroactively. So if you sold the home during the same tax year, you will be liable for Spanish CGT on the home sale. You can read and watch more content about this on Spainguru.es and on Spainguru's YouTube channel and on anything related to taxes. And also you can join my webinar about taxes that I have every 15 days. Now let's talk about after the approval. Living in Spain on a non-lucrative visa. First of all, you have to arrive to Spain. You have two options on how to arrive to Spain. Either you come from outside of Schengen and you enter directly to Spain, or you fly or drive to another Schengen country like France, Germany, Italy, or Portugal, and then from there you fly to Spain or drive to Spain. But you won't get the Spanish tax authority stamp on your passport, okay? So if you fly from New York to Madrid, you get the stamp from Spanish authorities and perfect. But if you fly from New York to Frankfurt, or you drive from London via France, you cross to France, the French authorities will stamp your passport, and you will not get stamped in Spain because it is internally borderless because of Schengen, right? So once you enter Spain, you have 72 hours to get something called the Declaración de Entrada, which is a one-page document issued by the police, usually the nearest police station to the border, or in each international airport, you will have a police station that they are used to issue this document, okay? The document proves that you enter Spain on a certain date, and that document will be the best proof for the police officer when you apply for the TIE card that you enter Spain on a certain date. If you don't have that document and you enter via Schengen, problems may arise. So it is recommended that you enter during the visa validity period, and if you enter via a Schengen country, get your Declaración de Entrada. Some other tips to enter Spain: get a Spanish SIM card to receive SMS from the authorities, open a non-resident bank account in a Spanish brick-and-mortar bank, because you will need to pay your rent, utilities, etc., and it will take some time to get your TIE card, so you will need a Spanish IBAN or bank account in order to do your stuff. Obtain an empadronamiento, okay, that is usually valid for 3 months, because 90% of cases they will require this document when you apply for the TIE card, okay? And as we said, you are officially required to obtain a TIE card within the 30 days after you enter Spain. Frequently asked question: is the padrón strictly necessary to obtain the TIE? We talked about that. There are no appointments to obtain the TIE. What should I do? And here I'm quoting a lawyer who is a very active member of the community, who said about the TIE appointment: in practice, it is not required to be obtained within 30 days. And that is one reason why they extended the validity period of the non-lucrative visa lately. The appointments can take up to 6 months without issue. The sooner the better, but no immediate rush. People will try to get appointments within the same province, okay, in order to get your tarjeta de identidad extranjero. And what about the padrón? Is it strictly necessary? Well, the regulation says that you need to show proof of address. The best proof of address is an empadronamiento, okay? And 90% of police stations will require you an empadronamiento. But many police stations, the big ones, for example, know that obtaining an empadronamiento sometimes is very, very difficult. And you know, they will accept other proof of address like Airbnb receipts or a rental contract, etc. Okay, and for example, in Malaga they were accepting just rental contract because they know that empadronamiento is taking time for them to issue, etc. Right. This is the situation. Now let's talk about renewal process. How and when to renew your NLV. So first you get your residence for 1 year. Okay, you enter Spain, and then the first year started. The first renewal that will be valid for years 2 and 3 within 60 days before the expiration date of your TIE and up to 90 days after the expiration. You will have to show financial requirements for the renewal, which are 2 times the initial requirements if the IPREM stay the same. If there are savings, but if it's passive income, you will be able to count that as double the amount, because if you get, I don't know, 20,000 euros of passive income per year, that counts as double, because in 2 years you will get 40,000 euros, right? So that's how it works. And the funds will need to be available, like immediately available, without penalties in an account, okay, when renewing. I recently ran a poll asking for people where they had their money when they renewed, and 90% of people had their money in accounts outside of Spain. But there are a few provinces, like for example, Valencia and Canarias, where they insist that you have some activity into a Spanish bank account, okay? So it will also depend on the region, how those interpretations are in terms of where you have the money. Now, the second renewal will be for years 4 and 5, and it works the same way as year 2 and 3. And after 5 years, maybe you want to obtain the long-term residence, also known as the permanent residence. That has certain requirements, and you need to apply for it. It is not automatic, okay? Now, the renewal process updates, changes effective on May 20th. First of all, the renewal period stays the same. It's renewals for 2 years. There were rumors that it was going to be 4. It stayed at 2 years. But now they included in the new regulation a 183-day stay requirement. Okay. So they say that visa holders are required to spend at least 183 days per year in Spain to qualify for the renewal. Okay. And this supposedly aligns with Spanish tax residency rules, meaning applicants would become tax residents. Now, let's talk about this. And I have videos with Ainhoa Manero, immigration lawyer from Sterling Abogados, talking about this. Okay, it's important. First of all, tax years and immigration years are different. Immigration years are natural years. For example, you arrive in August 2025, your immigration year goes from August to next August in 2026. But the tax year starts on January 1st to December 31st. So they can overlap, okay? But they're different things. So this minimum stay requirement is not that you have to become a Spanish tax resident. And in fact, Ainhoa Manero states that the same reason why they deleted the minimum stay requirement in the previous regulation because of a Supreme Court decision, the same happens with this new requirement of a minimum 183 days. The Supreme Court says that in the reglamento, in the bylaw, or in the regulation of the main organic law should not contain a minimum stay for the renewal of the visa. This requirement should be contained in the main organic law, all right? Therefore, this minimum stay requirement is not enforceable. Therefore, you don't have to stay 183 days in your immigration year, not tax year, 183 days in your immigration or natural year, right? So, in fact, at least for the first year or the first 2 years, obtaining a non-lucrative visa can be a great strategy to live in Spain without becoming a Spanish tax resident, according to Ainhoa Manero. And if you want to know more, I can send you the link. You just send me an email to hello@spainguru.es, or you go to Spainguru's YouTube channel and you search for the video for the minimum stay requirements, where she explains this very, very clearly. But basically, do you have to become a Spanish tax resident in order to renew your non-lucrative visa? The answer is a plain no, okay? Very important. And let's talk about a case study so that we understand how the quantities are calculated for the non-lucrative visa renewal. Financial requirements. Imagine you're a couple, you applied with the IPREM 2025, 36,000 euros funding requirement, minimum requirement. If you want to renew, if you are living in the provinces where they require double the amount, which is 95% of the provinces out there, for example, Madrid doesn't require double the amount, but in most provinces will. Imagine that the main applicant has an annual pension of 15,000 euros. Okay, that is passive income, it's not savings. So it counts that annually this person in 1 year will get 15,000 euros. The second year will also get 15,000 euros. So in total, this person is proving that in 2 years will get 30,000 euros, right? So they just need to complete the financial requirements with 42,000 euros, right? Which is what is left to get to 72,000 euros, which could be savings, for example, okay? Or another type of income. As I said, rental income is a bit dangerous because they could consider, the authorities, that you can be stopped being paid by the tenants. So it is not widely accepted, okay? But the more income that you show, of course, the more savings, the stronger the case that you make. And rental income, many people have also reported that they were renewed or even accepted in the initial application with purely rental passive income, okay? But either there is a shift in this, or there's been a few rejections or friction because of showing this type of income lately. Now, documentation requirements for renewal: ongoing private medical insurance coverage or public healthcare system coverage without gaps, very important. Updated passport copies for both individuals. And as we said, the coverage for health insurance has to be ongoing, and no police records. Okay, some people get police records in Spain because driving under the influence once they are in Spain, and this police record could be a denial in their renewal. So you have to be careful about that. And for 95% also of the renewals, they will ask you to provide an empadronamiento. Time you need to spend in Spain to maintain your residence, obtain long-term residence, and or get Spanish citizenship. And it'll be renewal. As we said, there is legal ambiguity now. Ainhoa Manero says that the minimum 183 days in Spain will not be enforced because of the Supreme Court ruling, for the same reason that the previous 180 days minimum requirement was deleted from the regulation. So you don't have to stay that minimum in order to renew. If you plan to be in this situation, I personally would highly recommend you to go with an immigration expert that actually understands this very well. And of course, Ainhoa is one of them. And you can find her contact on Spainguru.es. Now, if you want to stay in Spain and obtain the long-term residence after 5 years of residency, you have to remember that you cannot be outside of Spain more than 10 months in 5 years. Those 10 months don't have to be consecutive, but they cannot be more than 6 months in one block. Okay. If you don't comply with this, there is potentially the option to renew for a third time, called extraordinary time in Spanish, renovación extraordinaria, that not all the regions allow. For example, Galicia doesn't. Okay. Now, if you want to get the Spanish passport, how the minimum stay requirement, if you're a holder of a temporary residence, for example, you are a Latin American, and you know, Latin Americans, they can get Spanish citizenship after 2 years of legal residence in Spain. Only after 2 years. So if you're a holder of a temporary residency, you can't be outside of Spain more than 3 months per year to apply for the Spanish citizenship. This is a legal decision. It's a judge decision. It's not in any rule or regulation. It is a judge decision. People ask, what is this rule about the 3 months? It is a judge decision. Okay. If you're a holder of long-term residence, before applying for the Spanish citizenship, you can't be outside of the EU more than 1 year consecutively, or no more than 30 months in 5 years. Okay. And here in these slides, I go more in depth about the minimum stay requirement for the NLV renewal. I just explained you all this verbally, but you can watch the recording and see all the different slides, which will give you more in-depth information. Okay. Now let's talk about transition to work permit after 1 year. Okay. And these are not the only paths to work in Spain. You can, in fact, apply for work visas, okay, work permits, even before the non-lucrative visa. Yeah? Of course, it's going to be very difficult. So the easiest path for obtaining work permits, and this is what people recommend, is that you obtain the non-lucrative visa, then the residence. After 1 year, you will renew your non-lucrative residence, and after you have the renewal for year 2 and 3, you apply for a modification into a work permit. That it can be for your own project. You present a business plan, you get accepted or not, okay? And then you get a work permit por cuenta propia for your own project, or you get a sponsor or a job offer by a company, and you get a work permit por cuenta ajena, okay? Now, very, very clear. It's not that after 1 year of non-lucrative residence, you are automatically or have the right to obtain your work permit. No, you need to comply with the requirements, okay? And it's not going to be easy. Okay, but I know a lot of people who do it. Okay, it will depend also on your circumstances. But this is one of the pathways that you have. Another pathway is that many people are transitioning from non-lucrative visa to digital nomad visa. Okay, and again, this is again explaining the gray area situation of people working remotely and even under the non-lucrative residence. Although lately I've been hearing cases of denials. Okay, so it is a bit controversial, okay, working remotely under a non-lucrative residence and then transitioning to the digital nomad visa, okay, and doing a modificación. So I've been hearing things about like you should not renew your not a modificación, but wait until the non-lucrative residence expires, let's say not renewing it, and then applying from Spain for a new digital nomad visa, etc. So this is a little bit where we're standing now about this specific thing. We talked about pathways to obtain Spanish citizenship, like this Latin American case. Okay, so most of countries will be required to spend legally resident in Spain for 10 years, US, UK, Canada, Australia, etc. But then there are other ways to obtain it faster, and there are agreements between those countries in red in the map, Latin American countries like Hispano-American countries, plus Portugal, Andorra, Philippines, Guinea Equatorial, all those countries, if you're a passport holder of any of those countries by origin, okay, not by naturalization, by origin, then you are eligible for a 2 years fast track. If you move to Spain, you need to spend legally resident in Spain for at least 2 years instead of 10, okay, which is much faster even than the 5 years of long-term residency. And then you can apply for Spanish citizenship. And we're closing now, moving to the Q&A session now. And just to remind you, for people who join later on, about Spainguru.es, you can use it for absolutely free. You have weekly newsletter, YouTube channel with almost 1,000 videos, if not more, blog posts, more than 1,700, and you can join the Spainguru Facebook group for non-lucrative visa, which is the largest one out there. And all this is absolutely free to use. You can use Spainguru.es for absolutely free. And if you need professional advice, you can find vetted professionals on Spainguru, people who can help you with your NLV application, tax advisor, financial planners, health insurances, and so many other services, okay? Bonus slide here. How many people use professional help to apply for the non-lucrative visa? At least on the Facebook group, 50% of people do it themselves. Other 50% use professional help. And out of them, 80% are happy with the investment of going with professional help. We can stay in touch. Send me an email to hello@spainguru.es. I always answer my emails. If you have any questions or remark or whatever you want to talk about, I'm very, very happy to connect with you. Join the Non-Lucrative Visa Facebook group, watch the YouTube channel, and join the newsletter. And remember, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only, and it's not legal advice. Requirements listed here are not official, and please check your specific consulate requirements. Now, let's go into the Q&A session. And if you have to leave earlier, make sure to leave a Trustpilot review. It only takes 5 seconds of your time. You can go to Trustpilot on the green bar there and the red button. There's a button that you can click, and it will redirect you to Trustpilot so you can leave a review. Thank you so much for joining today. Now let's go with the Q&A. Cheryl, thank you for joining today and asking something. Can you name the date you want the visa to commence, and then it is 90 days from then, or is it simply when they approve it? Okay, so we have gone through this, and it's a bit hard to explain it now, especially now they're changing all these periods. So first of all, first question, can you name the date you want in the visa to commence? Yes. Yes, in the form, they will ask you, when do you want the visa to commence? Now, you can choose, you have to choose something that is at least 2 months in advance now, as per the new regulations. Yes, not earlier. Is it 90 days from then? So imagine that you apply today, July 1st. You can choose to start your visa on September 1st. Yes. Imagine that in August, they grant you the visa and they say, okay, we'll start the visa on September 1st. Then you will receive your visa and your passport. Now they are granting the visas valid for 1 year. So it will be September 1st to September 1st, 2026. Okay, more or less. But then you need to enter Spain from September 1st, September, October, November, during those 90 days, during those 3 months, okay, from the visa start date. That's when you need to enter Spain. That's what I recommend to do it, okay? And you need to get your Spanish authority stamp or declaración de entrada. I hope that I am answering your question. Cheryl, do they need all financial details or just accounts sufficient to meet the visa criteria? That actually depends on the officer reviewing your case, because many people, of course, are concerned about disclosing important data, and some of them, especially if you're dealing with a third party, not an official, let's say, governmental party like the consul itself, but you're disclosing this to an Indian company called BLS, right? You are, of course, concerned that there is a data leak, and why do I have to show this? But I'm telling you, like, as a person who has lived in Spain for more than 20 years, and I've been through the Spanish immigration procedures and bureaucracy, I always prefer to disclose much more, unfortunately, in order to reduce the friction in the procedure, okay? Everyone will, like, you need to find the right balance. It's not that you need to disclose, I don't know, maybe you have 5 million euros out there in different, liquid assets, whatever. You don't have to, but neither you have to be close to the minimum threshold, okay? So you have to make your case that is very, very clearly that you have the financial possibilities to move under an lucrative visa. So my answer would be not to be close to the minimum, okay? But you don't have to show, if you have 10 millions, you don't need to show 10 millions, okay? In your bank, you need something that makes perfectly the case that you are financially in good conditions to get this visa. And in general, they want to see more than less. In general, Eric, renewal is done in Spain, not with the original consulate. Correct, it's done in Spain. You can do it in a foreign office, but 99% of people do it via online. You need to get a digital signature to sign the official documents, and it is much easier and more streamlined if you do it online via an online official platform called Mercurio. Alan, is it income requirement net of income tax? No, it's gross. The income. So whatever income comes into your bank showed by your bank statements, then out of that income you will pay your taxes, etc. But no, it is gross, okay? It's whatever you can show that comes into your bank statements or whatever you have in your bank account. Okay, so sorry. Oh, what am I doing? No, sorry, I made a mistake there. There was a previous question. Sorry for that, but I'm trying to find it, sort by the newest. I will try to find that other question that I didn't answer. How long is the S1 Health route valid? I don't understand exactly what you mean, but I have basically you start the process, you request the S1 form with the Spanish authorities, and you get a certification saying that you have started it. Okay, and then with that certificate or with that document, you provide it with your documents, and then you don't need to supply the private health insurance. You can just provide that at the beginning of the S1 form. How long it is, I don't understand very well exactly what you mean. Eric, I will be using Chicago. Do I have to rent for months while the process is running? So as I said, Chicago is, a lot of people have to comply with this strict requirement. But I asked Ainhoa Manero about this, and she says that none of her customers have to do this because it is a crazy interpretation of this consulate, and not only this consulate, also Boston, for example, and I heard maybe Washington, D.C. as well. Yeah, people discuss online in the NLB group that you should. I recommend you to join and ask other people applying at the consulate, and also going and read the first-hand experiences on Spainguru for people who apply at Chicago. Maybe there are a few talking about that, but people supply rentals for at least 3 months or 6 months via Airbnb. And I also have a video on how to get your certificate in Spanish for visa purposes on Airbnb. And this is what usually people are doing, unless there are other requirements that I may not be aware of. Okay, and as I said, not everyone supplies this rental because immigration lawyers may think that it is a very strict thing that shouldn't be happening. Eric, what if my child is a Spain resident? Any benefit in the NLB process? I don't understand very well the question. He's already your Spain resident. If you are gonna get any benefit if your child is already resident in Spain, I don't think so. I don't think anything changes. Adnan, also on NLB, but I buy property in Spain and rented it out. Yes, you can buy property in Spain and rent it out. You will have to pay taxes on the income that you generate from that rental, but you can do it. And as I said, depends. It is not considered active income to have this. But of course, if you plan to buy 10 properties and put them on Airbnb, it could be considered to be a business operation. No? Alan, my question about the SL process, what I really mean is you have to go through the process at every visa renewal or just once? SL process. So I'm very bad with acronyms. I don't know the SL. Try to write always the full sentence with the full letters, with the full words, because I don't know. I get nervous when I'm on the webinars and I don't understand very well those acronyms. So anyways, yes, you need to renew your non-lucrative visa after 1 year for years 2 and 3, and then after 3 years for years 4 and 5. So you need to do 2 renewals for your non-lucrative residence. Okay. Adnan, if we plan for appointment on 15th of August, when would our insurance policy started? As I said, there is no official answer for this, but it is not about when you have the appointment, but when you plan or intend to enter Spain. If you plan to enter Spain, for example, on October 15th, this, in my opinion, but it is not legal advice, the safest is to start the policy on, if you intend to enter Spain on October 15th, to start your health insurance policy on October 1st. So you are covered when you plan to enter Spain. Adnan, hi, if we plan for appointment 15, okay, so this question, sorry, but the software is not working very well. It's not only me that I am a bit clumsy, but the software is working in a funky way, how to show the questions. I have one question in advance. Craig, 30K income or savings, or 30K income with 30K savings? So for a main applicant is 28,800 euros. That's the minimum threshold. It can be savings. So you have that amount in your bank. It's fully accessible without penalties. You can prove that you have that amount, okay, as savings, okay? Or if you have annual income of 30K, and we're always talking about euros, then you're fine. Even if you have 0 savings, you can prove that you have passive income for 30K, and it is a sure source of income, like not rental income, then you're fine too. Or a combination of both. You could have 15,000 euros annual income and 15,000 euros savings. So you combine both, you have 30K. But remember that when you renew, you will have to show double the amount in 2 years. So savings will count as half, and rental and passive income will count as double, let's say, right? So So yeah, let me see. As I said, this software is getting a bit crazy today for some reason. It's hard to publish. More questions here. Sorry, let's go to the chat and hopefully someone will tell me what question I missed. Maybe I have it here. Okay, so Cheryl, I think this is the question I missed. The website says that you need to show bank statements and have them translated, or you can be accredited that you have sufficient source of income. Who does that, and what form would that take? Letter. The website says that you need to show bank statement and have them translated. So as we said, the website, you mean, I guess, the consulate official website says that. Regarding this, the translation of bank statements, this is what people report. Okay, if your consulate and BLS office tells you that you need to sworn translate everything, then it is an official requirement. Okay, I don't know which is your consulate. I don't know what page you are mentioning. Happy to read it now. We can go, if you tell me the URL, the link, I can open it and comment on it now. But yeah, basically, this is what people usually do. 77% they don't sworn translate the bank statements as long as they can provide them in English, because if you have some bank statements in other languages, it is less likely that the consulate will accept them without sworn translation, right? Then about 17% of people only sworn translate the summary pages, 3% translated everything. Some people had banks that they could provide statements in Spanish. I heard that's the case of Chase in the States. Then someone else said that the bank provided a relationship letter. I don't know exactly what that is. So as you can see, there's a certain flexibility, and depending on the consulate, people will take a decision or other, in what refers to sworn translated bank statement, because it can be a huge amount of pages and therefore expensive to sworn translate. All right, good. I think we made it till the end of the presentation and the Q&A session. It's almost 2 p.m. here in Spain. I really appreciate that you joined today and you asked questions. It was pretty active, and I think most of the questions I was able to provide an answer for it. But remember that this is for information purposes only. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an immigration lawyer. You can find a lawyer on Spainguru.es, vetted lawyers and tax advisors and many other professionals. You don't have to, of course, but I highly recommend doing so. At least consulting with them for 1 hour, at least tax advisor and immigration advisor, consulting with them 1 hour just to make sure that you are in the right track and you're not, taking bad decisions that could be costly. Okay. Yeah, let's stay in touch. My email is hello@spainguru.es. Join this Facebook group, watch the YouTube videos, join the newsletter. All those are for free. You can opt out anytime. And again, if you can leave a Trustpilot review, it would be fantastic for me. It would make my day and help me a lot. Thank you so much for joining today. And I will send you the recording very, very soon later on the day. Thank you so much. Take care. Goodbye.